Why did one step from a guard change everything? No one in the unit had expected her to notice it. To most, it was nothing. A shuffle of boots on cracked pavement, a careless slip of balance. But to her, it was a signal. A fracture in the silence that meant more than any order, more than any plan they had rehearsed under fluorescent lights and weary stares. She had been trained to hear what others missed, to see what others dismissed. And on that night, in a place where the air felt heavy with things unsaid, she realized the difference between life and death might come down to something as small as a guard's single step. She lay prone on the rooftop, cheek pressed against the cold stock of her rifle. The night wasn't black, it was navy brushed with faint moonlight, the kind of quiet sky that soldiers feared more than storms. Because storms hid mistakes. This kind of stillness, it amplified them. Her breath was measured. Inhale, hold, exhale. She had done this countless times in training, but training never prepared you for the sound of your own heart when it felt like the only drum beating in the dark. Below, the compound pulsed with faint movement, guards patrolling, flashlights cutting across gravel, muffled voices carried by the night wind. She tracked them through her scope, eyes unblinking, hands steady. She was there to watch, not to fire. Not yet. But that step, the one that broke the rhythm, pulled her deeper into memory than she wanted to go. She remembered her first day at boot camp. How the others laughed when she dropped her duffel bag and the strap snapped in half, scattering her belongings across the dirt. A photograph had slipped out, its edges worn from too many touches. Some of the recruits picked it up, smirked, asked questions she never answered. She could still feel the sting of being the joke in a place where jokes didn't belong. And now, years later, on this rooftop with the rifle that had become an extension of her body, she wondered if she had carried that moment all this way. If maybe proving herself wasn't about medals or missions, but about never letting anyone laugh at what mattered to her again. The radio at her side crackled. A voice whispered her call sign. She didn't answer right away. She kept her eye on the guard, the one who had shifted weight too quickly, whose boots scuffed louder than the rest. He didn't know it, but he had just told her something. A nervousness, a flaw, or maybe a plan. She pressed the earpiece closer. "I see him," she murmured, just 3 words, no explanation, because in her world words were fragile. Silence, observation, that was strength. Her spotter shifted beside her, adjusting binoculars. He was older, slower, the kind of man who had once been the best shot in his company but now carried regrets heavier than his rifle. She liked him, though. He never questioned her instinct. "What do you think?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. She let the pause hang, the way her instructors used to when they wanted her to squirm. But she wasn't a recruit anymore. She was the one deciding what silence meant. "I think he's not just guarding," she said finally. "I think he's waiting." The spotter gave a faint exhale, like he didn't want to believe her but knew better than to argue. They had been in country for weeks, gathering patterns, memorizing the map of this place as if their own lives were carved into its walls. Every shadow, every doorway, every breath of dust mattered. And yet, even after all that, one step could unravel it. Her mind flicked back to another moment, another silence. Her father's last letter. She had read it so many times the paper had nearly torn at the folds. He was a soldier too, though she never saw him as one. To her, he was just the man who taught her how to ride a bike, who told her stories by candlelight when the power went out, who once whispered, "Strength isn't loud, kid. It's the thing you carry when no one claps for you." That letter had been the last she ever received, and though she never admitted it to anyone, it was the reason she joined. Not to avenge, not even to follow, but because she couldn't stand the silence his absence left behind. She steadied her scope again. The guard shifted once more, too restless, too sharp. And then he tapped his rifle twice against the wall, subtle, almost casual, but not to her. To her it was code. Her chest tightened. "He's signaling," she whispered. The spotter frowned. "To who?" She didn't know. Not yet. But her gut tightened, and she trusted that more than maps, more than plans, more than the endless hours of intel briefings that never once mentioned this man's boots or his nervous tapping. Her radio hissed again. "Time check, we're moving in 5." She froze, moving in 5. Her team gearing up for the breach. And here she was, staring at a signal that no one else had noticed. Her throat went dry. Should she say something? Should she stop them? She thought of the times she had spoken before, only to be met with silence or smirks. The times her instincts were brushed aside because she was too green or too careful. The times when men who didn't know her father, didn't know his silence, decided her voice didn't matter. But tonight wasn't about them. It was about the ones already moving toward the compound, the ones who trusted her without ever saying it. She closed her eyes for half a second, the kind of pause that feels longer than it is. Then she pressed the radio. "Hold movement," she said firmly. "Something's wrong." Static, then silence. Her heart pounded. She knew she had just gambled her credibility, maybe even the mission. But she couldn't shake the image of that guard, his boots, his tapping. Finally, a voice came back. "Explain." Her mouth went dry. She could almost hear the impatience, the weight of commanders who didn't have time for hesitation. She swallowed. "He's not packing, he's waiting, he's signaling. You breach now, you walk into something we didn't see coming." Another silence, the longest yet. Her spotter shifted uncomfortably. He didn't look at her. He didn't have to. She knew the weight of what she'd just done. Finally, the voice said, "1 minute hold, confirm." She exhaled, just a fraction, just enough to keep steady. The guard tapped again. This time, someone on the far side of the compound responded. A flashlight flickered twice, low and quick, barely noticeable if you weren't searching for it. Her blood chilled. It wasn't a guard shift, it was a trap. She whispered into the radio, voice sharp as steel, "They're waiting for us." The line went silent, the kind of silence that meant everything had just changed. And in that silence, she thought of her father's words. Strength isn't loud. Strength is the thing you carry when no one claps. She carried it now. And the mission, the team, the fragile thread between survival and disaster, it all rested on whether they listened to the woman no one thought would notice the sound of a single step. What happens in a silence no one dares to break. The rooftop felt colder after her words left the radio. The night, still. The kind of stillness that pressed against your ribs and made you wonder if even your heartbeat was too loud. She shifted her cheek against the stock of her rifle, grounding herself in the feel of it, the solidity of steel and scope when everything else felt uncertain. Her spotter muttered under his breath, not anger, not doubt, just the low hum of a man who'd seen too many nights like this end badly. "You've put yourself on the line," he said. She didn't look at him, didn't need to. "So have they," she answered. Below, the compound seemed alive now in a way it hadn't minutes ago. What once looked like a lazy guard rotation now pulsed with undercurrents, movements that were too deliberate, pauses that lingered too long. She could feel it in her gut. They weren't watching. They were waiting. The radio crackled again. Command's voice cut through. Calm clipped. "Team Alpha hold perimeter. Recon sniper continue observation. Confirm trap before retasking." There it was, the word she dreaded but needed. Trap, spoken aloud, no longer just her suspicion. Now it was on the airwaves. She tightened her grip on the rifle. "Copy." The spotter exhaled, slow. He tilted his binoculars toward the western wall. 3 guards moving in rotation, but their timing's off. They're stalling. Her scope shifted east. A shadow moved where no shadow should, then another. And then stillness like the night itself had folded them in. Not guards, not patrols, positions. Her chest constricted. Ambush. The kind her instructors warned about, the kind you never forgot if you survived. "They were never guarding," she whispered. "They were baiting." Her spotter didn't answer. He didn't need to. The radio hissed again, this time with voices layered, overlapping. Team Alpha whispering, some cursing, some silent. Men on the ground who now knew they'd almost walked into death. And somewhere beneath it all she thought she heard it, a tremor, relief, that she had seen it when no one else did. But relief never lasted long in war. The longer she stared through the scope, the more the compound changed. Every doorway felt alive, every shadow pregnant with intent. She couldn't unsee it now. It was a nest of waiting rifles. Her mind flicked back to the briefing room days before. The maps spread across the table. The monotone intel officer pointing to routes and structures. The silence when she raised her hand and asked, "And what if the compound isn't just a storage site? What if it's bait?" They'd glanced at her, shrugs, a sigh. One of them muttered, "Not everything's a trick, rookie." She remembered how her throat burned, how she forced herself to swallow the words she wanted to say. And now, on this rooftop, with Alpha nearly caught in that same assumption, she realized what burned worse than being ignored was being right too late. The spotter adjusted beside her. His voice broke her spiral. "So what now?" She didn't know. That was the truth. She had stopped the breach, yes, saved them from walking into it. But stopping was not finishing. And finishing was the part no one ever wrote about in the manuals. Her radio hissed with command again. "We need options. Confirm hostile strength." She swallowed. Options. Always asked for like they were numbers on a chalkboard, as if options didn't mean lives, didn't mean faces she'd have to remember. She steadied her scope again. Counted. 1, 2, 3 shadows crouched low near the east. 4 more packing, but with too much stiffness, actors, not guards. She whispered the numbers, her spotter confirming under his breath. "Estimate double our entry team," she finally said. "Positions set. They're waiting for us to make the first mistake." Silence followed, then command again. "Understood, hold, Team Bravo will flank west. Sniper, continue overwatch." Hold, overwatch. The words sounded steady, but she could hear the unease in them. Someone at the other end was questioning the maps, questioning the intel officer who shrugged her off days ago. Her spotter tapped her boot gently. "You bought them time, that's no small thing." She almost smiled. Almost. But it faded when she realized how fleeting that time could be. Her finger hovered near the trigger, not pulling, not relaxing. Just there. Because she knew the difference between 1 second of hesitation and 1 second of action could write the whole story. The guard, the one who had betrayed himself with that single step, shifted again. This time slower, almost deliberate. He raised a hand and the nearest shadow stilled. He wasn't nervous. He was orchestrating. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just a trap. This was rehearsed, practiced, perfected. She whispered, "They know how we move." Her spotter stiffened. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone told them." The words hit harder than any bullet. Inside her chest, something sharp twisted. It wasn't just about being baited. It was about betrayal. Her mind raced back through the days, the briefings, the whispers in corridors. The way some eyes shifted away when she walked into a room. The sudden cut of silence when she mentioned her father's name. She blinked hard, forcing it down. Now wasn't the time to unravel threads she couldn't tie back together. But deep in her gut she knew. The step wasn't an accident. It was a message. And maybe not just from the man below. Her radio broke her thoughts. "Team Bravo," voices low, tense. "We're in position, awaiting go." She closed her eyes for half a beat. Her father's voice came again, unbidden. "Strength isn't loud, kid." She steadied her breath, opened her eyes. The guard below raised his hand again, signaling silently to the shadows. She whispered, "They're about to spring it." And before the command could come back, before hesitation could cost lives, she squeezed the trigger. The shot cut the night in half. A sound too sharp, too final. The guard dropped, his signal hand never finishing its arc. Chaos rippled instantly, shouts, flashes, shadows scattering. Her spotter hissed through his teeth, "You just lit the fuse." She reloaded, eyes sharp, pulse steady. Better my fuse than theirs. Below, the compound erupted, not into random panic, but into movement too coordinated to be chance. Gunfire cracked in patterns. Doors swung open in unison. They were ready. They had been ready. Her radio screamed with voices, Alpha, Bravo, Command, layered chaos. But beneath it she kept her calm. Her scope tracked targets. One, two, another. Each squeeze of the trigger a punctuation, each breath a reminder that silence could kill as much as sound. Her spotter called numbers, adjusted her focus. Together, they became something more than two people on a roof. They became the thin line between ambush and annihilation. And yet, even as she fired, even as she cut through the chaos, the thought gnawed at her. They knew we were coming. Someone told them. That was the silence no bullet could break. And she wondered, as the night filled with fire and echoes, was she fighting enemies in the shadows, or enemies she'd never seen standing right beside her? How long can one heartbeat fight against the sound of 100 rifles? Smoke hung in the air like a curtain, the night shredded by bursts of gunfire and the heavy echo of boots hammering the compound floor. She pressed her cheek harder to the rifle stock, her scope fogging at the edges, breath controlled but sharp. Every squeeze of the trigger was deliberate, calculated, and yet every shot weighed heavier than the one before. Her spotter's voice cut through the storm. Left window, 2 men, ready. She adjusted, saw the shapes move where no shapes should be, and fired. The glass shattered, screams folding into the thunder of chaos. But the voices didn't fade. More shadows poured forward, not less. They knew, she whispered. They knew everything. Her spotter didn't argue. He was too busy calling out targets, reloading, marking the next threat. But she felt his silence anyway, the silence of agreement, of realization, of dread. Through the scope she caught a glimpse of Alpha scrambling back behind cover, Bravo pinned at the western wall. They were alive because she had fired first, but alive didn't mean safe. It meant desperate. The radio hissed with panic. Voices layered, sharp, some screaming, some steady. She forced herself to breathe through it, tuning out the chaos, finding rhythm in her trigger and her pulse. 1, 2, 3. Each shot a small piece of order in the storm. But then something else. A sound beneath it all, not gunfire, not commands. A voice, calm, deliberate, too calm for the battlefield. She blinked, adjusting her headset, straining past the noise. It wasn't on her frequency. It was bleeding through, faint but undeniable. A man's voice speaking in clipped, foreign syllables, directing, guiding. Her gut tightened. The enemy had comms, and not just comms, they had inside knowledge. Their formations weren't random. They were mirror images of the plans her unit had rehearsed. She pulled back from the scope, her chest tightening. They know our playbook, she whispered. The spotter froze. He looked at her, and in that split-second glance, she saw what he wouldn't say out loud. Someone had given them more than a warning. Someone had handed them the script. Her radio screamed again, "Sniper, report." Her hand shook as she pressed it. She almost lied. Almost said what they wanted to hear, that the enemy was improvising, that this was just chance. But the truth clawed at her throat. "They're moving like us," she said. "They knew we'd come, someone fed them." Static, then silence, too long, too telling. Finally, Command's voice came back, colder than before. "Focus on the mission. Eliminate targets. We'll debrief later." Later, always later. She bit her lip hard enough to taste iron. Later meant no one wanted to hear it now. Later meant silence would swallow it whole. She pushed it down, returned her eye to the scope, fired again and again. The firefight stretched into something timeless. Minutes felt like hours. The rooftop vibrated with every distant explosion, the compound lighting up in orange and white flashes that painted her face in ghostly colors. Her fingers ached from the trigger, her throat raw from breathing smoke. And then slowly the noise began to thin. The echoes grew longer between bursts, the shouts fewer, the shadows retreating. What had begun as a trap was turning, edge by edge, into survival. Not victory, never that, but survival. Alpha's voices came through first, ragged, relieved. Sector clear, holding. Then Bravo, western wall secure. Her chest loosened fraction by fraction. She lowered the scope, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Her spotter leaned back, wiping sweat from his forehead. For the first time in hours, or was it minutes, the rooftop felt still again. But the stillness wasn't peace. It was aftermath, and aftermath always carried ghosts. She rolled onto her back, staring up at the navy-black sky. Her ears rang, her hands trembled in the silence they had begged for minutes ago. She could hear her own breath now, shaky and uneven, as if her body didn't know how to exist without the rhythm of gunfire. Her spotter spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We shouldn't be alive." She turned her head. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and yet there was no question in his voice. It wasn't a doubt, it was a fact. She swallowed. "We are." He nodded, but his jaw tightened. "Because of you." The words sat heavy in the air. She wanted to believe them, to take them in as proof that she was more than the rookie they once dismissed. But all she could think was, if I hadn't noticed, if I hadn't fired first. Her radio crackled again, command's voice clinical. "All teams regroup at rally point. Casualty report on arrival." Casualties. The word sank like a stone. She didn't need numbers yet. She could already feel them in her bones. The missing voices on comms, the silences that didn't return. They packed their gear in silence. The descent from the rooftop was slow, cautious. The streets below smelled of smoke and burnt concrete, littered with fragments of what once were walls, windows, and men. She stepped carefully, boots crunching against broken glass. Every shard glimmered like a reminder. Alpha emerged first from the shadows, faces streaked with grime, eyes haunted. One of them limped, supported by another. Bravo followed, fewer in number than they had been. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence told the story well enough. She met their eyes as they passed. Some nodded faintly. Some looked away. But one young soldier, barely more than a boy, stared at her like she was something he couldn't understand. His lips trembled as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came. She looked away first. At the rally point the numbers came in. 3 wounded, 2 dead. Names she knew, names she joked with, names that had once filled silence with laughter. Now silence was all they had left. Her chest ached. She wanted to grieve, but the night didn't allow it, not yet. Command's truck pulled in, headlights cutting harsh beams through the dust. The officer stepped out, his uniform too clean, his boots too polished. He scanned the survivors with detached eyes, clipboard in hand. "Mission compromised," he said flatly, but objective shifted. "Intel suggests secondary site. We move at dawn." Her blood ran cold. Dawn. Another site. As if tonight hadn't happened. As if the bodies they'd left behind were just markers on a map to be erased. She clenched her fists. "They knew we were coming," she said, voice firm, louder than she expected. Heads turned. Alpha, Bravo, even her spotter. The officer's eyes flicked to her, sharp, impatient, speculation. "Observation," she snapped back. Her heart pounded, but she didn't let her gaze falter. "They mirrored our plan. That doesn't happen by accident." Silent, heavy, charged. The officer's jaw tightened. "Not your concern. You did your job. Leave the rest." Her throat burned. Leave the rest. That was always the answer. Don't question, don't dig, don't think beyond the trigger. But she couldn't. Not after tonight. Not after hearing that calm voice on the enemy comms, guiding them step by step. She glanced at her spotter. He gave the faintest nod. He'd heard it too. She wasn't imagining it. She drew in a shaky breath, held it, released it slow. Maybe she couldn't say it out loud yet. Maybe the silence would swallow her words again. But inside, something had shifted. A line crossed. This wasn't just a mission. This was something else, something larger. And she wasn't sure if her fight was against the men in the shadows, or the silence inside her own command. What do you say when silence weighs heavier than words? The rally point was dim, lit only by the glow of a lantern someone had hung from a broken pole. Soldiers slumped against walls, their rifles leaning beside them like exhausted limbs. Smoke still clung to their uniforms, and dust painted their faces pale. It was the hour after battle, the hour no one spoke of in training. She sat on the edge of a broken step, rifle across her knees, her body still wired as if a single crack in the night would pull her back into the scope. But the compound was quiet now, save for the faint hum of the lantern and the shallow breaths of men who didn't want to close their eyes. Her spotter lowered himself beside her with a grunt, bones protesting against the stone. He held his canteen loosely, staring at nothing. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You're not going to sleep, are you?" She shook her head, "Not tonight." He nodded like he'd known the answer already. He tilted the canteen back, then passed it to her. The water tasted metallic, bitter, but it steadied her throat. "I heard it too," he murmured. Her hand stilled on the canteen. "That voice," he continued, "on the comms, calm, guiding, that wasn't random chatter." Relief and dread tangled in her chest. Relief that she hadn't imagined it. Dread that if he had heard it, so had others, and yet no one else dared to speak. "Why won't command admit it?" she asked softly. He exhaled through his nose, slow and tired. "Because if they do, it means the leak is inside. And if it's inside, it means none of us are safe." The words settled like ash. She stared at the rifle across her lap, her reflection faint in the steel. She had always believed betrayal was something distant, stories whispered about other wars, other places. But now, sitting in the dust with two names already carved into memory, she realized betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it lived in silence. Across the rally point, voices stirred. A few of Alpha huddled near the lantern, talking in low tones. She recognized the boy, the one who'd stared at her earlier. His eyes caught hers again, uncertain, searching. She rose slowly, leaving her rifle with her spotter, and crossed the dirt to where they sat. The boy straightened, stiff as if caught doing something wrong. His face was streaked with soot, his helmet dented at the rim. He couldn't have been more than 19. "You were watching me," she said quietly. He blinked, startled. "I know, ma'am, he faltered, words tripping over themselves. She crouched so her eyes were level with his. "Say it." He swallowed hard. "If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't fired first, we'd all be dead." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him it wasn't that simple, that luck, instinct, maybe even fate had played roles, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded once. "You're alive, that's what matters." He hesitated, then almost in a whisper, Do you think they'll listen to you now?" The question cut deeper than she expected. She glanced toward Command's truck, where the officer still scribbled on his clipboard, his clean uniform glowing faintly in the lantern light. She thought of the way he dismissed her words, the way silence closed in like a wall every time she spoke. "I don't know," she admitted. The boy lowered his eyes. His shoulders sagged as if he'd hoped for a different answer. She placed a hand on his arm, light, steady. "But I'll keep talking." For a moment his lips pressed tight, then relaxed. He nodded, and she saw in his eyes something fragile but unbroken. Hope. She stood, moving back to the edge of the circle. The soldiers returned to their hushed conversation, but the boy's gaze lingered, like he was carrying her words into a place he hadn't been able to reach before. Her spotter was waiting when she returned. "You're building trust," he murmured. "Or doubt," she countered. "Both can keep a unit alive," he said simply. The night deepened. The lantern flickered. Some men dozed, heads resting on their packs, but their sleep was restless, fractured by dreams they'd never admit to. Others sat in silence, eyes wide, as if waiting for something to arrive from the dark. She didn't sleep. She leaned against the step, listening to the quiet, and in that quiet memory crept back. Her father's last letter. She could almost feel the paper again, creased and thin, the ink smudged where her thumb had pressed too often. His words were simple: don't look for glory. Look for the ones who stand in silence beside you. They're the ones worth carrying. She had carried those words into every mission, every training drill, every night she thought of quitting. And now here, she wondered if he'd known betrayal too, if he'd written that not as advice but as warning. Her eyes burned, though no tears fell. She hadn't cried in years, not when she left home, not when the others laughed at her duffel bag and her photograph, not when the silence swallowed her in briefing rooms. But tonight, for the first time, she felt the sting, not from grief alone, but from the weight of carrying too much in silence. The sky began to pale, navy softening into gray. Dawn crept in with cruel indifference, painting the ruins of the night in clearer shapes. The rally point looked smaller in the light, the soldiers more fragile, the bodies wrapped in tarps more final. Command gathered them at first light. His voice was clipped, efficient. We move at 0600. Secondary site identified. Same objective. Expect heavier resistance. Her jaw clenched. He spoke as if the night hadn't happened, as if the dead were just numbers to adjust on a sheet. She scanned the faces around her. Weariness. Fear. A few nods, reluctant but resigned. Her spotter leaned close, voice low. You don't trust him. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she asked the question that had gnawed at her all night. If there's a leak, what if it's not someone far away? What if it's here? His silence was answer enough. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, the weight grounding her. The mission would move forward with or without truth. But as the unit prepared to march, she promised herself one thing. She would not let silence bury this. If the leak was inside, if betrayal was closer than they dared believe, she would find it. Even if it meant standing alone. Why does dawn feel heavier after a night of survival? The sky was a pale gray when they moved out, the horizon painted with the thin line of a sun that hadn't yet warmed the earth. Their boots crunched over gravel and broken glass, each step dragging the night's weight forward. Dust rose in soft clouds, clinging to uniforms already stained with soot. She walked near the rear, rifle strapped, eyes scanning the edges of every building they passed. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was instinct. After what she'd seen, what she'd heard, she trusted the silence of streets less than the chaos of gunfire. Alpha led with steady pace, Bravo close behind, their lines uneven, shoulders slumped. They weren't the same soldiers who had marched in the night before, fresh, sharp, sure. Now they were thinner shadows of themselves, moving out of duty more than belief. Her spotter trudged beside her, his breath slow, deliberate. He was older, yes, but he carried the night differently. Not like the young ones who staggered under its weight, but like a man who had long ago stopped expecting mornings to bring clarity. Notice the silence, he murmured. She glanced at him. It's too clean. He nodded, his eyes scanning rooftops. Ambush doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's the quiet you should fear. Her stomach twisted. She thought of the guard's step, the signal, the calm voice on comms. Quiet had betrayed her once. It could again. They marched through a narrow street where walls leaned inward. Graffiti faded against cracked stone. Windows hung open like watching eyes. Every shadow looked like a breath held too long. The boy, the young soldier who had spoken to her at the rally point, walked ahead, his helmet bobbing with each step. He turned once, glanced back at her. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. He carried the look of someone trying not to be 19, trying to carry more than he should. She wanted to tell him not to. That carrying silence wasn't the same as carrying strength, but she didn't speak. Some lessons weren't given in words. The column halted, a fist raised at the front, everyone froze. She felt her pulse spike, the familiar surge that came when time fractured. She raised her rifle, scope up, scanning. Nothing, empty street. A stray dog darted across the road, ribs showing, tail low. It slipped into an alley and disappeared. Alpha's point man lowered his fist, motioning forward. The column moved again, but the tension lingered, sharp and cutting. Every step after felt like walking through glass. Her radio crackled softly, a voice she didn't expect. Not command, not Alpha, not Bravo, a whisper faint, almost like static. But no, there were words buried in the hiss. Foreign syllables, calm, deliberate, the same cadence she'd heard last night. Her chest tightened. She pulled the earpiece closer, straining. The voice wasn't calling commands this time, it was reporting, waiting. She slowed her pace, heart hammering. Whoever it was, they were close, too close. Her spotter noticed her hesitation. What? She shook her head, forcing her breath steady. He's here, the voice. His brows furrowed. He adjusted his own earpiece, listening. The hiss continued, faint, then clearer, a single phrase, sharp and final. Her stomach dropped. It was a countdown. She hissed through clenched teeth. Incoming. The blast hit before the word left her lips. An explosion tore through the column, fire and dust swallowing the center. The ground shook, ears ringing, bodies thrown. Screams ripped the air, sharp and raw. She hit the ground hard, gravel biting into her palms. Smoke choked her lungs, heat burning against her cheek. Her first thought wasn't of herself. It was of the boy. She scrambled up, coughing, eyes searching through the haze. Shapes moved, some crawling, some dragging others. The column was broken, fractured into pockets of chaos. Her spotter pulled himself up, blood streaking his forehead. Ambush, he shouted, though the word was swallowed by the ringing in her ears. Gunfire cracked from the rooftops. Shadows appeared, rifles flashing. The march had become a trap, just as the night had warned her. Her rifle snapped up, scope finding movement. She fired, breath sharp, recoil steady. One target fell, another crouched low. The street became a killing ground. But even as she fought, her mind burned with one thought. He was reporting. He was close. The ambush hadn't been triggered from miles away. It was fed from inside their ranks. She ducked behind a broken wall, her spotter dragging a wounded man to cover beside her. Blood soaked through the soldier's sleeve, his face pale with shock. She pressed his wound, steadying him with one hand while firing with the other. The boy appeared through the smoke, dragging another soldier by the straps. His eyes were wide, wild, but he didn't freeze. He moved, fought, survived. She felt a rush of something, pride, fear, maybe both. He was too young to carry this, but he carried it anyway. Command's voice blasted over comms, frantic. Hold position, return fire, regroup. She almost laughed, bitter and sharp. Regroup, when the group was already bleeding out in the dirt. Her spotter's voice cut through. They'll pin us here if we don't push. She knew he was right. She scanned the street, the rooftops. Patterns emerged in the chaos, the same mirrored movements, the same rehearsed positions. Whoever was feeding them intel wasn't improvising. They were playing both sides like pieces on a board. She fired again, her teeth gritted. Every shot was precision, every breath controlled. But inside, the fury built. Not at the men on the rooftops, not even at the ambush itself, but at the silence. The silence that still cloaked the betrayal in shadows. Minutes stretched, then fractured. Slowly, painfully, Alpha pushed left, Bravo right, carving space through the kill zone. Grenades echoed, shouts rose and fell. And then, bit by bit, the gunfire thinned. The attackers melted back into alleys, retreating like smoke in wind. The street was theirs again, but the cost was heavy. She lowered her rifle, chest heaving. The smoke cleared enough to see bodies scattered along the road. Some groaned, some didn't move at all. Her spotter leaned against the wall, breath ragged. His eyes found hers, and she saw in them the same thought she carried. This wasn't random. This was fed. Command's voice came again, sharp, demanding. Casualty report, secure perimeter, mission continues. Her fists clenched around her rifle. Mission continues. As if the bodies cooling on the ground were just markers on a map. The boy staggered toward her, his face smeared with blood and ash. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. They knew again, didn't they? She met his eyes. For a moment she wanted to lie to give him the comfort of doubt, but she couldn't, not after everything. Yes, she said quietly, they knew. He swallowed, his jaw tightening. And in that moment she saw the same silence she'd carried for years settling on his shoulders. A silence that could break him or harden him. Her spotter touched her arm, grounding her. "You'll have to choose soon," he said softly. She frowned. Choose what? He looked at the bodies, at the men reforming broken lines, at Command's clean uniform in the distance. Then back at her. "Who you're really fighting for." The words lingered long after the gunfire faded. "How do you rebuild a line that's already broken?" The street still smelled of fire when they dragged the last body from the rubble. Smoke clung to their clothes, burned into their skin. Blood streaked the road where boots had slipped, dark trails vanishing into cracks. The silence afterward wasn't peace. It was exhaustion, bitter and raw. She knelt beside the boy, pressing a bandage against the arm of the soldier he'd saved. His hands shook, clumsy, but he didn't look away from the wound. He was learning that some things you don't forget, the weight of blood on your palms, the feel of a pulse slipping through your fingers. "You're holding too much pressure," she said softly, adjusting his grip. He blinked, nodded, corrected. Her spotter crouched nearby, eyes scanning the rooftops as if the gunfire might return at any second. His forehead was crusted with dried blood, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he was too used to pain to give it voice anymore. Alpha regrouped further down the street, their voices sharp, clipped. Bravo carried the wounded into the shell of a collapsed shop front. The commanders moved between them, barking orders, ignoring the questions that simmered under every glance. Because everyone was thinking the same thing. They knew. The ambush had been too precise. The placement of explosives, the timing of fire, the choice of kill zone, it wasn't a guess. It was guidance. She heard it again, that faint hiss of the foreign voice in her comms, whispering just beneath the static. Not words this time, just presence. Enough to twist her gut, to remind her that the betrayal wasn't over. Command's lieutenant walked past, his uniform cleaner than it should have been, his boots hardly touched by dust. He barked something about perimeter checks, about not losing momentum. She watched him, her jaw tight. He didn't see the blood on the boy's hands, didn't hear the broken breathing of men who had given everything. All he saw was delay. She wanted to stand, to demand answers, to pull the truth into the open before the silence killed more of them. But she stayed on her knees, pressing the bandage, holding her own breath in her chest. Not yet. The knight's voices still echoed in her skull. He was close, too close. The boy finally looked up at her. His eyes were wide, rimmed red, but his voice was steady. "We should have seen it, we should have." "No," she cut him off. "This wasn't on you." "But—" Her voice hardened. "It wasn't on any of us." He flinched, then nodded, though she knew he didn't believe her. Not yet. He carried the kind of guilt soldiers learn too early, guilt that isn't theirs but sticks anyway. Her spotter moved closer, lowering his voice. "You hear it again." She met his gaze, didn't need to answer, he knew. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "If you tell them, they'll bury it, or bury you." She looked past him, at Command's lieutenant, clean and sharp against the rubble. Burying the truth was exactly what they would do. The perimeter check came back clear. The march resumed. Broken bodies carried forward, silent eyes fixed on the road ahead. They were ghosts of themselves, moving because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant thinking. As they moved, the city shifted. Streets widened into barren stretches of concrete and rusted vehicles. The horizon stretched, too open, too exposed. A new kind of danger. She felt the weight of every gaze, the sideways looks, the questions no one dared speak. Trust was cracking, and cracks spread fastest in silence. That night when they stopped to rest in the shadow of an abandoned overpass, the fractures deepened. Alpha clustered together, speaking low, sharp glances flicking toward Bravo. Bravo did the same, eyes narrowing, words clipped. The boy sat near her, knees drawn up, watching. Her spotter settled beside her, passing her a dented canteen. "You can feel it," he muttered. She nodded. "They're turning inward. It's what happens when trust breaks." She drank, the water warm and metallic. It didn't quench the dryness in her throat. A shout broke the low hum. Two soldiers squared off near the fire, one from Alpha, one from Bravo. Their words were jagged, accusations buried in them. Who knew? Who told? She stood before it could escalate, her rifle slung but her voice sharp. "Enough." The men froze, eyes snapping to her. Not because of rank, she didn't have the stripes to silence them, but because of the way she said it. A voice honed on rooftops, a voice that didn't waste sound unless it meant something. The silence after was heavier than the fight itself. Command's lieutenant stepped in then, his tone oily, dismissive. "Sit down, both of you. You're soldiers, not children." The men obeyed, though their eyes still burned. The lieutenant glanced at her, his smirk too controlled. "You have a way with them." She held his gaze, said nothing, because words weren't weapons she trusted anymore. Later, when the fire burned low and the night stretched cold, she lay awake listening, to boots shifting, to breaths held too long, to the faintest hiss in her earpiece. The voice again, close, always close. Her spotter whispered from the dark, "What's the end for you?" She turned her head toward him. "What do you mean?" "If you find him, the one feeding them, what's your end?" Her throat tightened. She thought of the boy, his bloody hands, of the step from the guard, the voice in the comms, the bodies in the street. She thought of all the mornings that hadn't brought clarity. "My end," she whispered, "silence, the kind that doesn't come back." He nodded, as if that was the only answer she could have given. And in the dark, she realized the truth she hadn't wanted to name. This wasn't about finishing the mission. It was about finding the silence that had betrayed them, and ending it before it claimed them all. Why did silence suddenly feel louder than gunfire? The march into the outskirts of the industrial quarter was slow, heavy, and restless. Concrete towers rose around them like teeth, their windows broken, their stairwells yawning black. The wind moved through rusted beams with a hollow moan, a sound that pressed against their nerves. They moved in staggered lines, rifles up, but their eyes weren't just on the buildings anymore. They were on each other. Every footstep carried a question. Every glance felt like a test. Who was feeding the enemy? Who was still clean? She kept her place near the rear, scanning both the rooftops and the shifting shoulders ahead. She could feel it, the paranoia crawling like ants across the ranks. The boy was close beside her, his face set hard, though his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. He wasn't just watching the shadows anymore. He was watching his own men. At the front, Alpha's lead muttered into his comms, his voice sharp, impatient. Bravo lagged behind, their formation loose, resentful. It was no longer one column. It was two bodies stitched together by force, not trust. Her spotter leaned in close, his whisper low. "They're circling each other. Won't be long before someone makes a move." She nodded, felt it too. The silence wasn't holding anymore. The crack came at dusk. They stopped to sweep an abandoned checkpoint, sandbags torn, rusted wire curling along the road. As men spread out, one from Alpha and one from Bravo collided near the barricade. Words were sharp, hands shoved. "You were too slow covering that flank," the Alpha man snapped. "You mean your flank," the Bravo soldier shot back. "Funny how they always know where you're standing." The words hit like a spark in dry grass. Voices rose, rifles shifted, accusations spilled into the open. "You're the leak." "No, you are. Who told them our route?" She pushed forward, cutting through the circle of men before steel turned into blood. "Stop!" Her voice cracked the air like glass. For a heartbeat it worked. They froze, rifles still half raised, breath sharp. Then the lieutenant arrived, striding into the circle, his tone smooth, rehearsed. "Stand down, all of you." But his eyes flicked, quick and telling. Too calm for a man walking into mutiny, too sure of himself. She saw it, her spotter saw it, and when her gaze cut to the boy, she knew he saw it too. The silence that followed was worse than shouting, because it wasn't resolution, it was fear forced down into the gut, and fear, when swallowed, always came back sharper. The march resumed, but the air had changed. Now the mistrust wasn't a whisper, it was a weight pressing on every step. That night they reached the shell of the secondary site, a skeletal factory complex, its windows blown, its walls leaning. The air smelled of oil and ash, of machines long dead but not yet forgotten. They set camp in the shadows, fires low, voices lower. No laughter, no release, just watching. She sat with her back to a cold wall, cleaning her rifle in silence. Her hands moved automatically, every piece sliding into place, but her ears strained for sound. The boy approached, crouching beside her. His voice was barely more than breath. "It's him, isn't it?" She didn't answer at first. The firelight caught his face, young but already carved by shadows too deep. "Say it," he urged. She closed her eyes, heard again the foreign cadence on her comms, layered beneath command's orders, heard the countdown, the certainty, the betrayal carried not from rooftops but from inside their lines. When she opened her eyes, her voice was flat. "It's coming from higher than any of us." He swallowed, looking toward the command tent, where the lieutenant's silhouette shifted against the canvas. Her spotter joined them, lowering himself with a grunt. His eyes flicked toward the boy, then back to her. "Careful what truths you speak aloud. Walls here have ears." The boy's jaw tightened. "So we just let it happen again?" "No," she said. "We wait, and when the silence shows itself, we don't miss." The boy studied her, as if measuring the weight of her words. Then he nodded, slow. The night stretched long. The factory groaned in the wind. Somewhere a metal beam clanged, sharp and echoing. Every man reached for his rifle, nerves frayed raw. But no attack came, not yet. Instead, the betrayal worked its quieter craft. At dawn, Alpha's packs were lighter than they should have been, supplies missing. Bravo swore they hadn't touched them. Shouts rose, bitter, accusing. The lieutenant stepped in again, his voice calm, oily. "This bickering makes you weak. Maybe that's what the enemy wants." But his eyes never looked surprised, never unsettled, as if the cracks were just part of the plan. She stood apart, her rifle across her knees, her heart hammering with certainty she couldn't yet prove. The silence wasn't just inside their comms anymore. It was inside their ranks, woven into their command. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the next step forward would be the one that revealed everything. Or destroyed what little remained of them. What does it take to turn silence into truth? The morning at the factory came brittle, the air thin with dust. Light spilled across the broken concrete, sharp and cold, and the men stirred like ghosts. They moved with jerks and hesitations, rifles close, eyes closer. The night had not rested them. It had sharpened them, turned suspicion into something jagged. She sat against the wall, rifle balanced across her knees. Her spotter crouched beside her, sipping from a dented flask. The boy stood a little apart, his gaze fixed on the command tent where the lieutenant's silhouette shifted in the pale dawn. It was the boy who broke the silence. "If it's him, how do we prove it?" Her spotter gave a dry laugh. "Proof, out here, proof dies faster than men do." But she didn't laugh. She watched the tent, the way the lieutenant moved, too easy, too sure. Proof isn't always paper. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's the only step a man doesn't mean to take. The boy frowned, but he understood enough to fall quiet. Orders came soon after. The lieutenant emerged, clean as always, voice clipped and steady. "Secondary site sweep, tight formation, no stragglers." The men gathered, their faces pale but hard. Alpha took the left, Bravo the right. The lines formed, uneven but functional. They moved. The factory swallowed them whole. Steel beams groaned overhead, their echoes bouncing through hollow chambers. Their boots scraped on rust and shattered glass. Every corner seemed too sharp, every stairwell too deep. She felt her pulse in her throat, the way a sniper does when the scope tightens and the target hasn't yet breathed. They advanced room by room, clearing shadows that never stopped multiplying. But her attention wasn't on the dark. It was on the man giving orders. The lieutenant walked with too much certainty. Every turn he chose, every hall he motioned them down, he didn't hesitate, as if he already knew what lay ahead. Her stomach knotted. She thought of the ambush, the countdown in her ear, the voice that was always there just beneath the static. Her spotter caught her glance. His eyes narrowed, he'd seen it too. The moment came sudden. The boy was at point when the comms hissed. The same foreign cadence, sharp and deliberate, bleeding through their headsets. She froze, every muscle taut. The lieutenant lifted his hand, signaling halt, and in the same breath, the voice finished its phrase. A countdown. Her body moved before thought. Down, she screamed, shoving the boy aside. The explosion ripped through the floor above them, concrete raining, fire licking the walls. Men screamed, debris slammed into helmets. Smoke choked the air. But through the chaos, she saw him. The lieutenant, untouched, already moving, his hand pressing something at his belt. A transmitter. Her rifle rose, scope finding him even through the dust. Her breath caught. Her finger tightened. But in that heartbeat, the weight of it crashed down on her. If she pulled the trigger, she wasn't just ending him. She was ending silence, ending command, ending the thin line that held these broken men together. Her spotter's voice cut through the ringing. Now do it. The boy's voice layered over his, panic desperate. If it's him, you have to. She exhaled, steady, silent, and fired. The shot cracked like a blade through the storm. The lieutenant jerked, the transmitter falling from his hand, blood blooming dark across his chest. He collapsed, his eyes wide with something between shock and contempt. The room froze. The men stared, rifles half raised, their breaths ragged. One of theirs lay dead, not from the enemy but from her. For a moment no one spoke. The silence was louder than the blast. She lowered her rifle, her voice low but sharp. He was feeding them, every step, every ambush. He was the silence in our comms. The boy stepped forward, lifting the transmitter with trembling hands. He held it high, showing them, proof enough. A ripple moved through the men, anger, relief, betrayal, grief. None of it clean, none of it whole. Her spotter's voice came soft, almost weary. It's done. But it wasn't done, not really. They dragged the wounded out of the factory, left the lieutenant's body where it fell. Orders from command crackled faint over comms, demanding reports, demanding progress. No one answered. The march back was slower than any before, not from enemy fire, not from fatigue, but from weight, from the knowledge that their own had led them into fire. The boy walked close to her side, the transmitter still clutched in his hand. His voice was quiet, broken. They'll bury this, won't they? She didn't answer at first. The sky stretched wide above them, pale and unforgiving. She thought of all the silences she'd carried, of all the mornings that hadn't brought clarity. Finally she said, maybe, but we won't. He looked at her, his eyes wet but steady. For the first time he didn't look like a boy. He looked like someone who'd carry silence too, but carry it differently. Her spotter limped beside them, his gaze on the horizon. Sometimes truth doesn't save you. Sometimes it just saves the next one. The march continued, boots dragging, rifles heavy. They were fewer now, scarred, hollowed, but they walked. When they reached the edge of the city, the sun broke through, light spilling across the dust. It didn't warm them, but it marked them. They stopped, not from orders, not from exhaustion, but from something quieter. A moment of stillness. She let her rifle hang, her eyes closing against the sun. In that silence there was no countdown, no betrayal, no voice but her own breath. And for the first time, silence didn't feel like the enemy. It felt like the only dignity they had left. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And then it lingers. In the steps no one forgets.